Good morning, good afternoon, good early morning, even our colleagues from America to this workshop. It's very a pleasure to have you to discuss about this very interesting topic on carbon neutrality. And only few words to introduce Aequilibria. We are a consultant and training company, and it's founded in 2002. And since the 2002, we have this payoff of evolving sustainable perspective. That is exactly the idea to consider sustainability not as a point that you may achieve, but is a continual improvement, continual evolution, taking consideration how the situation on the environmental level, and social level, and at the business level is going. And the workshop or the seminars, as we prefer to call it, are events that we organize every 2 months. The initial idea was to put in connection the consultant, the verification or certification body, conformity assessment bodies, and the companies, with the idea to describe, to explain some topic from the technical perspective, but even showing which are the rules for the conformity assessment activity, and finally to have the experience of company that is always very, very interesting in this case. And here are some examples of our workshops. So as you see, we started 5 years ago, and we touched several topics from carbon footprint of products, from ETS, environmental management system, energy management system, B Corp certification. So a lot of topics you may see here, and even on our website, it. And these are the rules for the participation. So please, if you may leave the cam open, is better, because you have an opportunity to see face to face with everybody. And obviously the microphone should be switch off, sorry. And you may write your question directly in the chat if you prefer, also, yeah, or raise your hand. But please take in consideration that we will have the discussion at the end of the presentation. So we will take note of your raised hand and your question, but the discussion, the question and answer will be at the end of the seminar. Here we are. So the topic for today is very, very interesting. I would say is crucial in this moment of the market, because we are waiting for the publication of the new standard ISO 14068 on carbon neutrality. And I will give some introduction on carbon neutrality, and then after me there will be the intervention of Jan Berg, the convener of the working group, ISO working group that develop the standard. Then we will have a coffee break, and after coffee break, an example of a program operator, the level of carbon footprint Italy for carbon neutrality, with Marta Tosetto, and then 1 hour for question and answer. So let me stop this part of the introduction and move to this other presentation. So the idea of this first presentation is to give you to start from the climate policy, that is the framework, obviously, that is applicable in this case. And after that, to give some general introduction on carbon neutrality, the meaning of carbon neutrality. For sure, I will not go in deep in the content of the new standard that will be published very soon, ISO 14068, but only to give you an overview of carbon neutrality. And then the connection between ISO 14068 and the PAS 2060. So the idea is to give you the framework, and then to pass the description of detail of ISO 14068 to Jan Berg in the next presentation. Okay, so we need to start from the Paris Agreement. we all of us know very well the importance of the Paris Agreement, and even the commitment that is connected with the Paris Agreement. So the need, the commitment to stay well below 2 degrees by the end of the centuries, and if possible, to have the target of 1.5 degrees. You know, it's very challenging considering the state of art of the emission in this moment. What is important is that a huge number of countries accepted the Paris Agreement in Paris, but even they ratify or accepted the agreement at the national level later. And so we have a large participation in the Paris Agreement. But you know, this is the global targets. The global targets, they need to have the national contribution with the voluntary commitment. And unfortunately, the scenario is not in line with the Paris Agreement. So we see here with this information of Climate Action Tracker that the commitment at the national level available at the moment does not allow to achieve the target at the end of the centuries. Even if we consider only the 2030 targets or the pledge targets, other additional commitment, in any case, we are not online in direction to achieve the Paris Agreement. Obviously, we know that in a couple of weeks, maybe 3-4 weeks, we have a further COP, the COP28 in Dubai, where we expect to have the direction of additional commitment in order to move more in direction of the Paris Agreement. But this is the state of art at the moment. At the same time, we recognize that there are very important targets at the national or regional level. For example, here we mentioned the European Green Deal, so the very important direction defined by European Green Deal, with the commitment to be the first continent with the net zero emission by 2050. And we know there are two targets, one in 2030, minus 55, and then the long-term target 2050 with net zero emission. And we know that it's very challenging because observing the trend of growth, stabilization, or slow reduction at international level, we recognize that this kind of target, net zero by 2050, is really, really challenging. It's not only a point of Europe, because we have several other countries with important commitment in this direction. For example, USA, with the minus 52% by 2030, that is similar to European target, even if the reference years is different. But in any case, the net zero emission by 2050. So it means that we are in the same direction, at least. And other very important players, the emerging economy, the most important emitters, GHG emitters at this moment at the global level, China, already has target for the reduction of carbon intensity by 2030, and even an absolute reduction target. It's really challenging for an emerging economy, for sure, that is to be net zero by 2060. And some other example, Australia, with Anthony Albanese, as a similar target, even again net zero by 2050. And South Korea, we have colleagues from Korea today at a seminar, and even here we have important commitment reduction by 2050. So a lot of important direction by 2050. At the same time, that a very strong change is expected in the economy, in the behavior of the peoples. And so the role of carbon neutrality is growing in terms of interest, because to achieve these kind of targets imply that we need to modify the policy at the business level of the economy. We see there are a lot of different initiatives. Some of them are managed by independent organization. Some other are private organization. Some other are the company, single company that is committed to reduce their emission or to move in direction of carbon neutrality. And together with this proliferation of initiative, there is a proliferation of labels. And the labels is the way of the company to communicate to the market their commitment in the direction of carbon neutrality. But when we have so many initiatives and label in connection with any kind of action, we know that it's also the risk to have disorientation, to have a confusion, not to be able to recognize which of these initiatives as very reliable, as very important, and which one are the fake labels with the important risk of greenwashing. So this is a topic always more important on the markets. And looking again with a European perspective, we should note that in this moment, the European Commission is working to a new directive for the green claims. And the green claims implies to define, to specify what is allowed to be communicated, what's not allowed to be communicated. And one of these points that for sure will be touched by Jan, otherwise we will touch during the question and answer section at the end of the workshop, is that there is a clear reference in the directive, the new directive, to carbon neutrality and to offsetting of the emission. But only one moment here to describe from where we start, because we want to discuss today about this new important tool, the ISO 14068. At the same time, we have already offer a lot of tools available on the market. For example, we have all this part of tool here that is available for the companies. So we have the carbon footprint of organization, or how is it called, the greenhouse gas inventory for organization, the ISO 14064 part 1. Then we have the ISO 14067 for carbon footprint of product. Then ISO 14064 part 2 for the project able to reduce the emission. That is the base for the generation of carbon credits. And these three tools are available on the market for companies, for any other business subject. At the same time, we have another important area that is the one that need to ensure that 1 ton of CO2 is always everywhere in each sector 1 ton of CO2. It is the conformity assessment area. And the conformity assessment is based in two main standards. The ISO 14064 part 3, sorry for here, that is the way to verify the greenhouse gas statement, so verify and validate, and the ISO 14065 that is for the accreditation of the body performing verification and validation. In addition, we also have an important standard for the competence of verifier and validators. So you see, we already have a package. And then it's important to underline that this package is already working at the international level. For example, in Italy, we have a lot of accreditation scheme for CFO, CFP, etc., and even the mandatory scheme, ETS, MRV shipping, etc. And in this framework, we should consider the new requirement of carbon neutrality. But before all, we need to underline, to give some very, very briefly explanation of the meaning of carbon neutrality. And the carbon neutrality is a kind of balance, a kind of equilibrium between positive and negative. So between the emission of the company or the organization or the event, or so the subject, we would say, so the emission of the subject and the removal on the other side of the balance. So we need to have a neutral, an equilibrium between the positive and the negative. Consider that the negative part, removal reduction, could be a combination of mitigation and offsetting. And for sure, Jan will explain more in detail these aspects. But underline 3 times, carbon neutrality is not only offsetting, because we see a lot of advertisement, a lot of claim of company at this moment says we are carbon neutral. We offset our emission of a product, of organization, therefore we are carbon neutral. And this is dramatically wrong. And this is a key point. We know that this is the reality of the market that we see in Italy, but maybe Jan later will explain if in UK they have the same problem, but at least in Italy we have a lot of companies claiming something that is not true, because it's not enough to offset, to compensate their own emission to claim to the market your carbon neutrality. And for this reason, we need to have a standard. For this reason, ISO decided to develop ISO 14068. And so to achieve the carbon neutrality, you need to have a path in the direction of carbon neutrality, and the reduction of carbon footprint is a fundamental aspect. For sure, Jan will spend more time later, will go more in deep, but this is an important topic that we need to share at the beginning. So we quantify, then we need to reduce our emission. The action is fundamental, and therefore, at the end of the process, you may counterbalance the remaining part with offsetting. And ISO 14068 is not coming out of the sky. So it's not a standard that is completely invented by 20, 30, 40 experts around the world that participate to the working group. Because we already have an important experience. And this experience is the PAS 2060. So the PAS is not formally a standard, it's a public available specification. It's like in Italy, we have the PDR, that is a similar topic. In the ISO level, there is IWA. So this kind of pre-standard tool are useful to put on the market some methodology without having the complex process of development of a standard. So the PAS 2060 is very important, move the market, clarify the topic that I just described before, that to be carbon neutral is not enough to compensate your emission, clarify the reduction is a key part of the process. At the same time, there were some weak points. And for this reason, at the ISO level, has been decided to develop a new standard that is ISO 14068. Here you see FDIS, the Final Draft International Standard, because this is the last version available. At the same time, last Friday, there was the result of the ballot, and the ballot was positive. Therefore, there is no more doubt. This document will be transformed for a final draft to an official draft in weeks. I don't know many. Maybe Jan will give later more update on it. But in any case, this is a clear direction. We will have soon a standard for carbon neutrality. And yes, I hope that I give you a sufficient explanation on where we are in terms of the market communication, the action and target of the company, where we are in terms of developing the standard, then what we need to understand in the next future is to see how these two areas, the need of the companies and the requirement of the standard, will join in order to give more clarity and transparency to the market on the carbon neutrality. So, and here I stop my part of the presentation, and let me only go back for 1 second. I think you should see here. And okay, now I want to introduce Jan Brun. Jan is the convener of the ISO TC207, subcommittee 7, subcommittee 7, subcommittee dedicated to climate change, and the working group 15. The working group 15 is the working group responsible for the development of this standard. I don't think we need to introduce ISO because it's a very well-known organization, and for all the participants of our seminar, it's quite a common reference body or documents. And Jan, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you.
Underlining that the participation to this working group was very, very large. And then for this reason, it was not an easy activity for you to guide this working group, even in consideration that you were not the first convener, but you joined the working group later. So for sure was not an easy task, but at the end you've succeeded, and that is a very important point. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do you want me to present my own slides?
Yeah, I think it is more effective if you like. Otherwise, we may do for you as you prefer.
Okay, in that case, bear with me one moment, and I will move into the right.
Don't worry.
Right. So actually, I will do it that way. That's the easiest way. Share screen. Screen 2. Share, and if I now go, I'm sorry, let's go to the start, not that it matters.
Okay, it's okay. Perfect.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Daniele, for that excellent introduction. I will run very quickly through my first 4 or 5 slides because I think they're saying things that you have already said. Oh, and just one thing I will say, if anyone is looking for me, my name is spelt not quite as on Daniele's slide. The Y comes before the R, but that's no problem.
Sorry.
No problem. Daniele had a slide showing lots of different labels. I also have a slide. I looked and I think there was only one label that appears on both, which just shows how many different labels there are. But as he said, the problem is that there is no real quality control. For some of those, all you have to do is just go and buy a few offsets, and then you can go and stick the label on your product or on your organization. So that produces a strong chance of greenwash. There's also a concern between carbon neutrality and net zero. People are not quite sure what the relationship is between the two terms, and I'll say a bit more about that later. But within ISO, in the 14068, we are just looking at carbon neutrality. Net zero is like a long-term target. As we saw for the countries, the target might be to get there by 2050, or in the case of China, 2060. ISO have been concerned, a lot of us have been concerned for a long time that because of all the claims, carbon neutrality was beginning not to mean very much. And although, as Daniele said, there was the PAS, which was a good standard because it was only a British standard PAS and not a full ISO standard, it wasn't always being recognized internationally. So that was one reason for trying to create it. And we needed to make sure that we kept to a number of very basic rules that came from within the PAS. Firstly, it needs to look at the full carbon footprint, not just selectively. Secondly, as he said, we need to make sure we have a plan and have started on reducing emissions or potentially removal enhancements. And only then can we offset with good quality credits. So let's see how we approach those. I won't say any more about ISO. I think we mainly know about ISO. It's important, though, to bear in mind also the great importance of ISO 14001, that there are very strong use within the environmental sector, as well as with the quantification standards, the 14064 series that we looked at earlier. Oopsie, I beg your pardon. That was a duplicate slide. So essentially we have the working group set up. This is the way ISO does things. As he put on the introduction slide, we have something like 150 experts registered to the working group from 37 countries and 5 liaison organizations. Typically, the work has been carried out at a series of, I think there were over 30 meetings, some by Zoom, some face-to-face, by around 25 to 40 people in each meeting. The picture there we have is just of the final meeting at the very end in Costa Rica in June. And as you can see, there are some of us in the room, including Daniele, who's sort of standing up to the left here, but also we had quite a number of people online, so that it was inclusive. You did not have to attend a meeting in order to be able to take part and make your contribution. As far as the timeline is concerned, again, as we mentioned, the FDIS, the final draft for the standard, was passed by a very strong vote, 38 votes in favour, only 2 opposing, and a number of abstentions. You always get a number of abstentions from countries that have been less involved. That was done last week. We now are in a final editing to check that all the spelling is correct, that we use the right kind of dash, because ISO is very particular about how its standards look, and that we everything is effectively complete, and there are no gaps and errors in it. But that's a very quick process, and the target is still to publish by the end of this month, just about the time that the COP starts, although a decision was taken not to launch it at the COP because there were felt to be a lot else going on. At the risk of telling you everything 3 times, and they say it's always a good idea to tell people 3 times in a presentation, this is what happens. This is the summary of what's in the standard. There's a pathway. There's a process for going through. So the standard starts off by setting out some key principles. It particularly explains the hierarchy approach, which is this concept that you first reduce, then you make any removal enhancements, and then finally you do any offsetting that's necessary. And that we have to have a long-term pathway in mind so that we can see a situation where the subject of the calculation, whether it's an organization or a product, will have only residual emissions left. They're the ones that are technologically or economically impossible under current conditions to eliminate. Now, it may well be that as we go through the pathway, situations change and some of those emissions will become able to be removed. But at the moment, it's the ones that we can't do anything about. And that's where effectively we have to do a little bit of balancing off to be at net zero. But within carbon neutrality, we're just on that pathway. We haven't got there yet. We need to make sure the top management commitment. We need to be careful about how we define the subject. And as I said, it could be an organization or it could be a product. It's not intended to apply to countries or territories. So we can't go and say that we will make Italy carbon neutral, but it's perfectly possible that a function within government can choose to become carbon neutral itself. So it might be that we can say a particular ministry operations are carbon neutral. We need to do the quantification, ideally in line with the ISO series of standards that Daniele has highlighted. We need to put the whole thing into a plan, and then we also need to have started making reductions and removal enhancements. And then, and only then at the end, do we get into offsetting. And then also you can make the claim. So let's look at this in more detail. If we start with the principles, there's a list of around 10 laid out within the standard. I'm going to just highlight 2 here, one of which is the conservative estimates that are necessary. So we mustn't look at this through the right, on the good side. We have to recognize that sometimes things don't work, and if we're making a reduction measure, we may not achieve quite the savings we hoped we would. Likewise, if we're making removals, we have to make full allowance for things that might be reversals of those removals. So we have to be very conservative in our estimates. And the second one I want us to just draw slight attention to is the avoiding adverse impacts. This is sometimes referred to as do no harm or do no significant harm. We actually avoided using either of those phrases in the standard because we recognize it's very difficult for there to be no adverse impacts at all. So you might be doing a reduction that reduces CO2 emissions, but that might lead perhaps to some other environmental impact elsewhere. The classic example is the move towards electrification of vehicles, where at the moment there are lots of concerns about some of the impacts of the mining the minerals for batteries. And so that by purely focusing on the CO2 reductions or on the GHG emission reductions, there can be a risk of something happening elsewhere. And it's important, as one of the principles, that organizations take that into account when setting their plans for carbon neutrality. I noted that it's the full carbon footprint that's calculated. That's all emissions. It's not just carbon dioxide, but it's the whole IPCC basket, or sorry, it's IPCC, isn't it? UNFCCC basket, rather, of GHG emissions. So it's methane, it's the F gases, it's sulfur hexafluoride, it's any of the other ones that may be involved with the organization, either directly or indirectly. And that's true that it's also direct emissions and indirect emissions. So it's not just the ones that come out of the tailpipe, but it's the ones that go into the whole value chain. It's a life cycle process. For products that are sold to business to consumer, we intend it to include the use phase as well. But for business to business ones, we recognize that's not always possible. So that if, for example, you are trying to calculate the emissions on 1 ton of steel, you will not necessarily know how that steel is going to be used. So in that sort of circumstance, you can make it from cradle to gate as opposed, cradle to gate as opposed to cradle to grave, to use the two phrases. There's various ways that we can set the boundaries, and I'll come to that in the next slide, I think, or the following slide. As far as calculation methods are concerned, we insist that they are consistent with 14064 Part 1 for organizations and 14067 for products. 14064 Part 2 would be used for any removal projects or similar activities. We recognize, however, also that in the market, and particularly among large companies, there are other products out there. There are things like the GHG protocol that are widely used, and providing that they are consistent with the 14064 series, then they can be used. And indeed, we have an annex in the standard to show how specifically the GHG protocol and the 14064 relate to each other, so that people can do that relatively straightforwardly. We also recognize that there may be national methodologies. So, as you can tell, I'm from the UK, and in the UK, our government departments, DEFRA and DESNES, together publish each year a list of conversion factors with an associated methodology. And that's widely used by smaller organizations to calculate their carbon footprints. It's also consistent. It requires all gases to be taken into account, and it requires the full life cycle to be taken. So it's a very similar process, but we recognize that there may well be, as I say, national methodologies that are widely used. We don't repeat the detail of the calculation in 14068. That's not the purpose of the document. The purpose of the document is to point you and say, this is what you should be doing. Go away and find the right standard to do it. We insist also that before the process goes much further, that you have a carbon neutrality management plan. And this is to prevent people just going away and saying, well, we'll buy some offsets and I expect we'll be okay. We require it to be ambitious and for it to contain credible reductions. So we don't expect people to be able to do it all at once. We recognize that the process of making an organization or even a product carbon neutral can often be quite long and be quite difficult, and therefore we need to give people time to do it, but we need to have a credible plan to do it. The ambitions and the plans should relate to the Paris Agreement, preferably to the 1.5 degrees C global target, rather than the world below 2 degrees. But we recognize also that it needs to be usable by smaller organizations. And we're concerned, for example, that there are some other products out there which are actually quite difficult for small organizations, for SBs to be able to use. We also push people very much towards looking at absolute emissions, because that's what we need to reduce at a global level. We recognize that occasionally people may be wanting to look at intensity, but there are certain rules around that. And we also recognize that although avoided emissions are a useful concept, they cannot be included in the calculations where the savings maybe are being made as a result of using a product. The classic example there is perhaps if you've got something like insulation, you're not allowed to take the credit for perhaps the fact that the insulation may reduce a third party's emissions. But a plan without action is no use to anyone. So the plan has to be supported by real actions to support the transition. And you need to be able to demonstrate real GHG emissions reductions. Or in a few cases, you can use removals enhancements, but in most cases, organizations will start with reductions under the hierarchy. And it needs to be ongoing. It's not a once only situation. You need to keep it going for many years. So I think that it's important to be able to see that we are making reductions, to be able to demonstrate that before we can move to the next step. And that, of course, is the offsetting. As we've said again, it's not just about offsetting. We have all these elements that come before we can get to even consider offsetting. Offsets can only be done after the reductions and removal enhancements have been made in line with the plan. And they're used to balance unabated emissions. This is the sort of the residual carbon footprint after we've come to a net result from the other actions. And the standard does not say you must go and use a particular brand or a particular type of offsets, but what it does do is it indicates the key elements that are necessary for offsets to have, hopefully, reasonable value. They have to be real. They have to be additional, so they relate to things that would not have happened without the finance going into buying the credits for those offsets. They have to be measurable, and they have to be permanent, and there have to be rules set by the registry that maintains those offsets for what happens in the case that they are not as permanent as intended and there are reversals. And of course, they have to be in a recognised registry, and they have to be retired or cancelled to make sure there's no double counting or double use. And there's two long lists of detailed requirements in the standard. One is for the actual credits themselves, and one is for the organisations that maintain the registry to make sure that you're actually putting or purchasing credits in the right place. And once you've done all that, once you have made your footprint, once you have made the reductions against that footprint, and once you have actually then offset any or counterbalanced any emissions through the purchase of good quality credits, then, and again only then, can we allow you to make a claim. The claims follow the principles in the earlier ISO 14020 series standards, and they have to be made against verified calculations. So we have to be able to not just make a general claim and say, well, we've gone away and bought a few offsets, but we have to say exactly where we've done it and how we've done it. So there's a lot of transparency required. And there are summaries as to what needs to be done in terms of a more detailed approach that you might find by going to the website or some other publicly available source for the organizational product, as well as what might be put on a pack or on the side of a van, perhaps, if you are actually claiming carbon neutrality for a product or for an organization. Finally, just in the last few minutes, I want to look very briefly at the relationship to net zero. The chart on the bottom of the screen is completely incomprehensible because of the fact that it's in line with ISO rules, has no labels other than numbers which then relate to a key, and I haven't got the key on the screen. But essentially, carbon neutrality is something that can be done on the way to net zero. They're not the same. There are overlaps, and a lot of the underlying principles are very much the same, but most net zero claims are about some target in the future, typically 2050, but other years obviously are possible. Carbon neutrality claims are actually about today. They're about what we have achieved already on that pathway to net zero. And in this diagram, and I'm going to just try and point out some of the points, this grey area, numbered 1, if you can see it, I'm not sure whether you can see my mouse or not, is effectively historical emissions, no action being taken. At this point here, we decide we're going for carbon neutrality, and so we start making reductions. This would be the original line. The top line is sort of like the business as usual lines. This is the first year's reductions, this little bit here between the first 2 dotted lines. We've started making some reductions, and we've made offsets this area underneath. And at this point, once we've done that, once we've completed the first year of offsets and reductions, then we can claim carbon neutrality. And from then on, our emissions must continue to fall. So we must continue to fall until we get to this level they marked as 3, which are effectively the residual emissions that we can't technologically or economically feasibly eliminate at this stage. And whilst we're doing that all the way, we're matching the reduced level of emissions by carbon credits, by offsets. There are 3 different types of offsets. And before we can actually claim carbon neutrality, the offsets have to be based upon removal offsets. So they are effectively counterbalancing these residuals with removals. And that's the situation at net zero. But the important part as far as 14068 is concerned is this period here in the middle, where we are making reductions in accordance with a plan. We might have some removals as well, and we are counterbalancing the remaining, the unabated emissions by good quality carbon credits. So just to summarize, at the moment, we know there's a lot of variations what's behind all the claims, and the purpose of the international standard is to try and get rid of that and to produce a standard which everyone can agree is as good as we can basically do. It's not just about offsetting. It requires action to first manage, then reduce emissions, either through reductions or through removal offsets. And it's aimed primarily at organizations and products, including the services. Things like events are included. Things like financial products are also included in a short annex. It's not the same thing as net zero, but it's very closely related to it. And we think that there's actually a benefit also that some people are very much against offsets or carbon credits. And we feel actually that probably there are still some benefits in having them in helping fund the transition in less developed countries. And with that, I'll ask, are there any questions? So actually, no, we're going to have questions later, aren't we? I beg your pardon. So
yes. Thank you so much. And you also introduced interesting terms like unabated emission, residual emission, then the connection with the already existing ISO standard, as well as not ISO, but other important reference standard on the market. And so a lot of input that are very interesting for the further discussion. And, the habits that we have with our seminar is to stop all the time the presentation for a coffee break, because it's not easy to follow via Zoom, long speech, long presentation. So we think that we may take a break now. We may have a coffee, then we go back for the Marta presentation, and then we have, with our fresh mind, all the time needed for the discussion. So you may stay connected. We only close the video and the microphone, and we reconvene at 20 to 11 set time, CET time, and so in 20 minutes from now. So thank you, Jan, for the moment, and then we reconvene in 20 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are back. I hope that you had the time to drink a good coffee, to refresh your mind, to be full of energy for the second part of the seminar. And so now we have the presentation of the program operator Carbon Footprint Italy. In particular, we have Marta Tosetto on behalf of Carbon Footprint Italy that will introduce us this program operator and even the connection between a program operator already mentioned by the ISO 14068 and the connection by with a program operator and 14068, the ISO 14068. So, Marta, the floor is yours. If you'd like to share your screen.
Good morning, everyone. So we've just seen that the new ISO 14068 provides a carbon neutrality communication methods. And it is essential for a company to communicate seriously and in a reliable way the information and the results related to the carbon management, from the quantification to the achievement of the carbon neutrality. But it is necessary, it's fundamental for this information to be supported with a transparent communication. And as Daniele and Ia just said before, there is a lot of confusion due to the numerous carbon neutrality label. And on top of that, many companies decide to communicate their results through property label. But in this way, it is easier to incur in the risk to transmit a self-referential message that could be perceived also as greenwashing. So for this reason, ISO standards as ISO 14067, ISO 14026, and the new ISO 14068 recognize GHG program operator as the subject that gives credibility to communications related to all the environmental aspects, also footprint and results. So at the international level, there are a lot of program operators for communication. But in Italy, the program operator is Carbon Footprint Italy, that is dedicated to communicating the results of the quantification of GHGs of product and organization and their reduction. Also, Carbon Footprint Italy provides, in addition to quantification and reduction, a carbon neutrality label for organization or products that are already registered in the program operator according to the international recognized standards. And these are the two new labels for carbon neutrality. Recently, Carbon Footprint Italy, in order to align with the new upcoming ISO 14068, updated the rules for the recognition of carbon neutrality label, but we're still maintaining the previous past 2060 standard just for a transitional phase until the full application of the new ISO 14068 standard. So what is needed to achieve the Carbon Footprint Italy's carbon neutrality legislation is that the entity, the applicant, should already have a carbon footprint of organization or a carbon footprint of product registration in Carbon Footprint Italy, supported by a third-party accredited verification according to the ISO 14064, Part 1 for organization and 14067 for product. The values of the CFO or the CFP are the emissions that need to be first reduced and then offsetted in order to obtain the quantification, the certification. So it is important and has to be demonstrated a concrete achievement of reduction of the carbon footprint through the GHG emission reduction and increase of the GHG removal action before the offsetting. So this is a most important step. After the reduction, the unabated GHG emission shall be offsetted to achieve the carbon neutrality. And to do so, Carbon Footprint Italy requires that the carbon credits used for the offsetting shall originated from program recognized by Carbon Footprint Italy. And these programs need to be linked to GHG project of real removal reduction of the emissions. And as we can see here, there are the 3 programs that Carbon Footprint Italy recognized for carbon credits. For the carbon footprint of product or the organization, there is needed a verification by an independent third party, and the same thing needs to be done for the registration of the product and or the organization Carbon Neutrality in Carbon Footprint Italy. So there needs to be, this registration needs to be verified by an independent third party according to the carbon neutrality standard. Obtaining the registration in Carbon Footprint Italy allows the entity, the applicant, to use the Carbon Footprint Italy label on its products or organization. And this label also comes with a QR code that refers to the specific product and organization sheet. So to create a deeper collaboration, also to increase the synergies and dissemination of the carbon footprint of organization or product at an international level, 6 programs operated from all around the world decide to sign voluntary agreement, named Memorandum of Understanding, just as to create also a network. And here we have the 6 programs that now agree to this agreement. And so we have Italy, United States, Costa Rica, New Zealand, Thailand, and the newest member, Korea. So this is an important step. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you for your presentation. And so now we have at least one clarity at the end of this presentation, that offset the emission is not enough, because we saw with different perspective, looking from the market perspective, looking for the ISO perspective, ISO 14068 perspective, looking for the program operator perspective, sorry, we always have the same indication. You need to quantify in a reliable way, and then you need to reduce. You need to reduce because it's not enough to offset, to buy credits in order to claim to be carbon neutral. I think this is an important message that we should share, at least as a result of the first result of this seminar. And so now is the time for the question, and we already have some questions in the chat. I don't know, Jan, if you have the opportunity to already have a look to the chat. There is one from Rajesh Vazirani, if I pronounce it correctly, that is in connection with a specific program, that is Aequilibria program. I don't know, Jan, if you already have some feedback, or if you prefer that we ask Rakesh to better articulate his question.
Maybe we could ask Rakesh to ask his question. I wasn't sure what the reference to Aequilibria.
Okay, so Rakesh, if you don't mind, I see that you have another question, but we go one question per time. So if you don't mind, you may better articulate your first question, and then we will see for the second one later. Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, for taking the time to share your experience and wisdom, especially when we talk of 14068 and you started, so Daniela, you started sharing the big picture. And then we see how this standard could be a tool, a mechanism to support our work. What has been in the news with regards to criticism of carbon neutrality related activities has been these big bombshells first being reported in the media in UK via Guardian, and then being reported by New Yorker about what happened with the Kariba project in Zimbabwe, I think, and so on. So I'm curious, when the team got together 14068 and were ironing out each of these basic requirements, was there also an activity where you would say, okay, now let's apply these principles to these two cases and see how 14068 would help avoid these two failures in the mechanisms? And now, while you talk about this, perhaps if you can also reflect on what Daniela said about carbon neutrality claims to be banned by EU, unless you have credible evidence and there's a science behind it and a standard behind it and a framework behind it and verified. Well, all of that.
Rakesh,
Yes.
I suggested to put as a second question the part of EU because it's a big question. So we start with the first one, if you don't mind, and for sure we have a discussion about the EU
Sure.
new framework. Yeah, thank you. Jan, do you have already some feedback from your side?
Yes, thank you. I think we are all very concerned that some offsets do not achieve what they are trying to do or what they are claiming to do. And that's why when we went to write the standard, when we were writing the standard, we tried to put a fairly long and exhaustive list of the characteristics that organizations and entities should look for when purchasing carbon credits. So we had, as I said, there are two quite separate lists. There is one that relates to the actual credit, but then there is a second one that relates also to the organization that is issuing the credit to the registry. We recognize that nothing can be perfect in this area. There's always a risk that something might happen, a political change or a natural disaster, or that the estimates from the credit can be somehow overstated. But we have tried to make it as strong as possible. We've also obviously had the experience of using this with PAS 2060 and with the Costa Rican standard Indigo B5. So we have some idea as to how people will try and do it, will try and claim neutrality using credits.
Yeah,
it's not a perfect answer because unfortunately I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect carbon credit.
Yeah, but I don't think we need to have all the answers today because we are at the end of one process that is the preparation and the publication soon of the standard, but we are also at the beginning of another process that is the implementation of the standard. And for this reason, very happy that we also have an accreditation body representative here from Italy, from Romania that may share their experience. But going back to the point of the credits, and for sure, this is a really critical topic. It's a sensitive topic, but at the same time, what is the intention of the standard is to underline the need to use credible credits. And this is the point. It's difficult to say now what will be the border for credible, not credible credits. We have a standard, we have a programs, but for sure, this will be an important question for the next months and years. Vincenzo, do you have a reaction of this specific topic or you have a new one?
It's a new one.
Okay. Rakesh, are you satisfied with the answer? You want to add something in this direction?
I'm satisfied. I get a picture that we know there are some limitations and there will be continuous improvement. So satisfied.
Yeah, so now we give the floor to Vincenzo. I know Rakesh, you have another question. There's another question in chat. And then we have the new directive question. That's a hot topic. But Vincenzo, you go first, please.
Thank you, Daniele. I'm Vincenzo Micheli from Bureau Veritas Italy. I have a question for Bayern. I want to understand if ISO 14068 introduced the concept of G&G normalization. Why I'm asking you these things? Because according to my experience, sometimes it's quite difficult to demonstrate the GHG reduction after a specific reduction action, because the G&G emission can change, for example, after a change of production volume that can bring changes of energy level, about natural gas, electricity, and so on. So I want to understand if in 14068 there is this concept, and how it's possible to make a correct picture between the baseline GHG emission and a new calculation of GHG emission after GNG reduction. I don't know if the question is quite clear. Okay, thank you, Beth.
The standard certainly refers to looking at GHG intensity, which I think effectively is the same thing in terms of that you'll normalize it for volumes, but encourages people to go for absolute reductions as far as possible, because of the fact that we recognize that at a global level we need to have an absolute reduction. But we also recognized that there may be growing organizations, or perhaps organizations that are involved in the transition. So for example, if you are a supplier of renewable energy equipment or something, where it may well be that the volumes are increasing. But what we're keen to try and discourage is where a company might just be expanding in a non-green manner, and still finding some way of actually on an intensity basis saying, look, we've made a reduction. So the aim is that wherever possible, companies or organizations should be looking at absolute reductions.
Okay, thank you. I jump back to the chat because we have a question from Claudio Bruno. It's not a question. It's a question. Also, is a sentence. Offset from removing emission or from avoiding emission, or both. But removing and avoiding are not the same. So we had a long discussion about avoiding emission. Jan, if you want to start with this part, then
yes. Effectively, in the early stages of carbon neutrality, you can use either. You can use either reduction emissions or removal emissions. As you go through towards net zero, then the expectation is you would only use removal emissions. But there was a lot of discussion about that, and the standard does allow all types of emissions, providing they meet the standard requirements on real, measurable, etc., to be used in the initial carbon neutrality claims.
Okay, Claudio Bruno, it's okay. You're satisfied? Okay, thank you. And I want to go back to Rakesh. You have a second question about Science-Based Target Initiative. Has there been interaction with the team at Science-Based Target Initiative to align, adjust, integrate approach of 4068, or will this start after official launch, and maybe with Asia Carbon Initiative like ICBCM, etc.? Jan?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Has there been interaction with
SBTI?
Yeah.
Not at the working group level.
Yeah.
At the subcommittee 7 level, at the level of the ISO subcommittee, there have been discussions on a wider range of matters, not just 14068 with SBTI. And the chair of the subcommittee, Sarah Jane Snook, has been actively pursuing those, although I should say that we have not always found it as easy to engage with SBTI as we might like. I will say no more, but I think certainly ISO is open to collaboration always with other parties. And of course, it's possible for parties to be represented on working groups, either to be participating actively at the working group stage, or as observers to receive paper, so they're kept informed of what's going on, and then if they wish to make a representation, they can do. And we certainly have, for example, the GHG protocol were involved in they didn't actively participate in meetings, but they received the paperwork on the development of 14068 as we went through. But SBTI did not for 14068.
Yes, I want to only to add that this point is under discussion, the point of cooperation with other international organizations, not only Science-Based Target Initiative, because there are several more that are acting, very important actors on the market. And as mentioned by Jan, this is something that is elevated at subcommittee or technical committee level, subcommittee 7 or TC207. And we had the strategic leadership group of TC207 Tuesday and this afternoon, because there is the meeting in Rio de Janeiro, in Buenos Aires, sorry. So in this afternoon, this will be a point that will be discussed. So only to inform you that this kind of interaction is really on the agenda, on the top of the agenda of ISO TC207 in this period. So, Jan, now we have the hot potato, the hot topics, European directive and on green claim. What is your feeling, your feedback on these aspects?
As the working group convener, I put in a response to the last consultation, saying that we felt that where there was a properly validated claim of carbon neutrality that was not just based around offsetting, but included a pathway to net zero and included actual reductions taken to date, then that should be permit a continuing claim of carbon neutrality and should not be banned. The final response in general, not to that specific point, but the final response or the final text of the Green Claims Directive, I don't believe is published yet. But that talking to working group members who are much better connected with the European Commission than I am, we get the view that we're getting opposing views back. Some of them say that they think that the Commission will be open to allowing claims where they are not just based on offsetting, but based on a combination including offsetting. But others say they think that anything that includes offsets, even as the final step, are likely to be banned effectively and not permitted. So the answer, I'm afraid, is I don't know, and I suspect no one really knows exactly how it will work out. My concern is that it may end up with one of the big players in the market in the end having to go to court to actually get this interpreted, which is unfortunate. That would be, I think, a bad situation to be in. But I can see that could well end up being the case.
Yeah, Jan and I have this conversation a few days ago because the document, the directive, is still under preparation, so we don't have the final text. And reading the existing text, there are some room of interpretation. So I think we are on the same page to consider that if the carbon neutrality claim is based on the official standard, is based on real action of reduction, is based on credible offsetting, shall be accepted by the directive. But this is a point of interpretation of person reading a draft document. So for sure, we need to be focused. We need to continue to read, to study the document in the next months, because this will be a crucial aspect for the credibility of carbon neutrality and the possibility to use carbon neutrality at the European level. In addition, Jan, we ask the European Commission to participate to the next CENTC 467, is the European Technical Committee on Climate Change. So we invite the European Commission to present, to discuss the draft of directive in order to understand which shall be the most suitable interpretation. Yeah. And
that actually ties in also with a question that Rakesh has just put into the chat about conformity assessment. 14068 does not require third-party conformity assessment. However, it may be that the solution as far as the European Green Claims Directive is concerned is that if it is third-party assessed, it may be allowable, but if it's either first or second party, so if it's internal assessment, it may not be, and that will prevent people just going away and making a claim. It's possible that could be a way of actually solving, if you like, the problem with the Green Claims Directive. The reason there's no requirement for third-party assessment under 14068 is that if you're writing an international standard that requires that, you have to go through certain additional steps with CASCO, which is what CASCO stands for, is conformity assessment, something or other, and that as a general rule, ISO does not encourage standards to go down that route.
Yes, and because this is the neutrality requirement or principle of ISO standards, and then we don't ask a mandatory third-party verification certification in a standard. But maybe you may also note that even in ISO 9001, ISO 14001 is not required the certification, because it's very clearly described in the introduction. The standard could be used for self-declaration, first part, second part, etc. So the point is that the market will require the certification or the verification. So our expectation is that in the standard is not required, but the market will require a third-party verification under accreditation. And again, we have accreditation body here. If you want to add something more, you are welcome. Otherwise, I go back to the okay.
Can I just ask if Marta has a view about the Green Claims Directive?
You're right.
Yeah, I think it's important for companies to adjust to what we just said and to really follow what the new standard said about the important to communicate the results of the quantification. So yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion still to what is right to do and what is the danger to fall into a greenwashing communication. So yeah, I think we need to really study and maybe train companies to communicate well the results of the environmental aspects.
Okay, thank you. And I see Lorenzo.
Yes, I want to return to the theme of the conformity assessment because I want to ask a clarification, because you Jan, correctly say that there is no conformity assessment for the ISO 14068, but the conformity is requested for the claim. Am I wrong?
Oh, I don't think so. Sorry.
I remember that in the ISO 14068 for the carbon neutrality claim is requested a third-party verification. But you just say that there is no conformity assessment for the standard for the implementation of the standard. Am I wrong, or I understand something else?
So you mean there is a specific requirement for the conformity assessment of the claim, but not for the carbon neutrality? Is this the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think that's the case. You've got me worried now, but
okay. So maybe
I would need to check the exact wording of the standard in that case.
Yeah.
I haven't got I have not got open this morning, but
yeah, but maybe Lorenzo, if you have the possibility to share, to find the specific sentence to share the screen is easier. Otherwise, it's difficult to jump without having the text in front of us. And so I take the opportunity for another question, the why. And Gonare Maronju, for the offsetting reforestation in Europe, the only way is to have a validation from gold standard or similar. What do you think? This is also in connection with the Claudio Bruno consideration. Do you know in the European Union Commission and Parliament are preparing a regulation of voluntary carbon market? What do you think about it? So we may put together these two questions. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. I think anything to bring order to the carbon market is good. And, again, that's all part of trying to get rid of the greenwashing. So I think that would be helpful.
Okay. One more question by Ilaria Minardi. Good morning. I would like to know if for carbon neutrality, according to the new ISO 14068, is mandatory to have a GHG inventory certified according or verified according to 64. Yeah. So is it mandatory to have a verified 14064 part 1? I would say.
No. The intention is that the calculation be done with in line with 14064 part 1 or with an equivalent standard, but that the verification is of the whole process rather than the individual steps. So under 14068, you would not verify the calculation or the quantification separately from the reductions or from the counterbalancing and the offsetting. You would look at the entire package before you got to a verification statement assessment.
Okay, thank you.
I will come. Can I come back to Lorenzo's question? And I'm just going to paste into the chat if people can see the chat. To paste it to everyone.
Yeah.
I think. No, it's not working. I'll try again. If it doesn't work, I'll read it. Yeah, that's it. We have at the end of the section on claims a requirement that they should state when and by whom the carbon neutrality claim has been verified. That's not a requirement to have it verified by a third party or external conformity assessment. It's possible under K to say that we've done it ourselves. So you can say it's been done by our internal audit department, or it's been done by the person who actually thought up the numbers in the first place, first party assessment. And the reason that's there is precisely so that people do know whether or not it's first, second, or third party assessment, but it's not a requirement for third party assessment. And I think that's probably where the misunderstanding may have come.
Are you satisfied, Lorenzo?
Thank you.
Okay. Then there is a question by Rakesh. It's not really a question, it's a consideration, I think. It seems ISO 14068 would be a boom for SMEs, but they will also be stressed by push of large company about science-based target initiative. It will be useful to get feedback from association, national, regional, of SMEs, textile, food, etc., on implementation of this standard. So I think that is a absolutely correct. We should expect to have this kind of feedback after the implementation will start. And then we may ask Jan to organize already in advance another seminar in 1 year from now to take the first consideration on the implementation of the standard.
Thank you. If I can add on that as well, that my background is working very much with SMEs. So whenever I have been reading draft as the convener, and the convener is not allowed to influence things very much, but whenever I have been looking at the convener, I have been thinking, will this work for a small organization?
Yeah. Okay, we have a consideration of Gonare in relation to what we already just discussed before, and then we have a question from Carlo Pasini. Excuse me, maybe we didn't get the point, but we would like to understand if we can obtain a certification at the end of the pathway of reduction, or just planning the pathway will be enough. Can you please clarify this point? So is the reduction needed or not? So we may have an answer maybe from Marta and Jan, from both sides, from the standard point of view and the program operator point of view. We'll start.
From the standard viewpoint, you need to have made reductions and then have got a pathway to get to effectively to net zero, to just having residual emissions. And of course, obviously, you have to have done the offsetting as well. But it's not where you've made all possible reductions. It's where you have started on the reduction process, and you can demonstrate that you have made some reductions and then are offsetting the balance.
Yeah, for the program operator point of view, it is necessary the intention for reduction. So it needs to be demonstrated the achievement of the reduction of the GHG emissions through the reduction of the emissions and through the increase of removal action, GHG removal actions before the offsetting. So yeah, it is necessary.
This is another, I think, important point, Jan, because in some way, maybe this is one of the most important difference in comparison with the past 2060. Correct me if I'm wrong, because past 2060 allowed to obtain the carbon neutrality status only with the commitment, without showing the real reduction in the first year, and only from the second year asking for real reduction. But if I'm not wrong, in 68, the situation says that only when you are able to demonstrate a real effective reduction, you may claim to be carbon neutral.
That's correct. That's correct.
It is also interesting because maybe in the program operator that is in transition phase between the past 2060 and the ISO, maybe this could be a kind of important topic to be managed. Yeah. Carlo, it's enough. You want to add something in relation to your question?
We would like to add something.
Okay.
Yes, I would like to know if this effective reduction means something quantitatively, for example, 10% reduction or something like this. Or and the second part of my question is, so if a society decide to commit with the SBTi, that would be how would I say, enough for the 68 to be eligible for certification?
Okay, maybe I start taking consideration with the previous comment by Marta, by Jan. I would say that the commitment is not enough. The numbers of real reduction, could be percentage or could be ton of CO2, is needed, because only if you show numbers, you are able to claim that you really reduce your emission. And in connection with science-based target is a commitment to, it's not the really real reduction. So for sure, we see some synergy between 4068 and carbon neutrality, but at the same time, the carbon neutrality asks to see now that you already have done something yesterday. Marta, Jan, do you have anything to add?
No, we thought about putting in a fixed percentage, as Carlo has suggested, but we came to the conclusion it would be too difficult to find a number that would be universally applicable. So I guess there is a risk that people could do it with a very low ambition and start making very small steps. But that's one we will have to, in a sense, keep an eye open for, and it's possible that might be something we'd need looking at when we get to the revision stage.
And Marta?
No, nothing on my side. Just to say that the intention is, of course, first step, but then for the program operator, we need to demonstrate the actual reduction. So through a quantification, of course.
Okay, thank you. And then we have Claudia Moretti. What do you think about the production of carbon offset credits obtained in Italy? Projects such as bamboo forest or forest protection? Very difficult to have an official answer, because we don't have the authority to express official judgment. What I may say that there are a proliferation of projects that want to claim reduction, carbon credits for every site. But at the same time, we believe that only when you have a reliable, credible program operator, then you may have a credit that may use it for carbon neutrality. For this reason, we mentioned Verra, DCS, Constanda, Marta mentioned Srl-Carbono. So programs that are already existing, they are showing that they have clear rules and credibility on the market. So all other subjects on the market, in my view, are in a more gray area where everything needs to be deeply understood. I don't know, Claudio, if I satisfy your question or not. Okay. And Jan and Marta, obviously, if you want to add something.
Again, simply to say that the aim is not to have that forest protection would not meet the requirements. Afforestation or reforestation would do, but simply being paid not to chop down existing forests does not count.
Correct. To underline it. Rakesh, one more question. Will there be some supplemental information material with the release of ISO 14068, e.g. how it compares to past 26s as best target, etc.? Jan?
There will probably not be official material from ISO. There may be informal material on the SE7 website, where there will be sort of interpretations or whatever put up. And I know that BSI is itself wondering about having a guide for conversion between PAS 2060 and 14068 that would allow people to understand the differences between the two standards. But that would be because the PAS is a BSI document, that would probably come from BSI and not again from ISO.
Jan, here we have a very interesting question, because we had even some discussion in Italy about this option. Is it possible to allocate guarantees of origin and carbon credits to just a specific product to claim it as carbon neutral product? Let me say, guarantee of origin is another topic. Is in connection with the carbon footprint of products. So I suggest to be focused only on carbon credits here. So the idea is to buy a small amount of carbon credits and to allocate specifically to a product in order to claim that it's carbon neutral.
Yes. If you are not required to claim neutrality or even apply credits, therefore, to all products, you are allowed to choose specific products and have some as carbon neutral and some as not carbon neutral. And I know that that may not be a popular answer, but
So it is to confirm that you may buy carbon credits for a specific product, even if the standard has some kind of firewall that say, please clarify your policy, why you have only one product, specify if you have a future policy. So there are some kind of firewall, but it's allowed.
That's right. There is a statement requiring why you have selected a particular product.
But going back to the point of the guarantee for origin, so is the green energy, let me say, this is a point not in connection with carbon neutrality, is a point in connection with the 14067, carbon footprint of product. And this is not allowed. It's not possible that you buy 10 certificates and then you consider this green energy only for a specific product. Because what you buy need to be allocated to all the production, not only to a specific product. So again, it's not a topic of 4068, it's a point of 4067. And so in this case, the answer is completely different. I don't know if you're satisfied. Sorry, Jan?
I was going to say that's correct, although there is reference to market-based electricity in Annex B4 of the 14068 standard.
Yeah. Carlo, are you satisfied?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. And
Daniele, I want to add that in the website of Carbon Footprint Italy, there is a section, the Q&A section, and there are a lot of questions, of course, and also for the guarantee of origin or energy. So someone wants to have a look at the Q&A. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Marta. Very, very interesting point. So the Q&A, maybe the frequent asked question, maybe give already some indication on how this kind of topic is managed at the national level. Yeah, thank you. And Rakesh, one more question from the program operator names mentioned. They are under investigation, internal and external, and while there is a credibility standard for eco-labels, as e.g. from Israel, sorry, Rakesh, if you may explain your question verbally, because it's not completely clear for me.
Yeah, sure. Sorry for the acronyms. We heard from Ian that one section within 14068 talks also about what is expected from the program operator for offsets or credits. Is that correct? And there's some expectations. Yeah, okay. Now, there are, of course, should I say popular or prominent program operators in the world. Some of them have been named in investigations, and we see the changes taking place in those organizations in the past 6 months. Yeah, they've come up with their overall details. So I'm curious, when we talk of eco-labels and so on, there are credibility principles in place, and there are organizations like ISEAL or the EU Green Deal proposal, which talks about what makes a claim or eco-label credible in terms of how it has been established, how was the consultation, how was the complaint process, and so on. With regards to a credible program for offsets, such that it be reliable, do you know if there are some kind of credibility principles, or is it included already in that section of 14068? What makes an offset program credible?
Okay.
14068 includes a numbered list of 9 requirements on carbon crediting programs. And then one of them actually has 4 sub-points to it. Again, I'm afraid this is the way that ISO tends to do things. It sometimes tends to go away and write its own requirements so that the documents are self-contained and not to risk tying itself to a third party that might then, as you say, subsequently fall into some sort of problems or disrepute.
Okay.
Maybe we may also, Marta Tosetto explained during her presentation that there was some specific program named by the program operator. And what I may add is also that the 14064 Part 2 is the reference standard specifying which are the basic requirements to obtain a credible reduction. So we should connect even 4064 part 2 in this process. And Marta, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you just said everything.
Okay. Francisco Zamarron, 3 quotes from the UATS scheme or CERS that need to be purchased to meet UATS regulation. Can be considered carbon credits for offsetting? Jan?
I don't think they can.
And maybe, Francisco, you may better explain your question, because in some part, this is mandatory requirement for the organization. So if the exceeding quota of emission is balanced with these carbon credits, then maybe this part or this part could be considered in the duration of the carbon neutrality, but not for all the remaining part, in my understanding.
That's right. I don't think they would meet the additionality requirement.
Okay. Okay. Any other question or comments? I don't see any more. Okay, but we have a lot of conversation. Question was very interesting. The question and answer section, a lot of input that are useful, not only to understand the standard, but even to give some input to Jan for the further steps for the implementation of the standard, or the process to revise, to improve the standard. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. In particular, Jan Byrne for his presentation and Marta Tosetto for her presentation. And so see you, stay tuned, and see you in the next seminar workshop to discuss another interesting topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.